I'll just wait a couple more minutes. Yes, of course, I am going to be sharing the PowerPoint. I've got the last slide, I've got a list of lots of different resources and websites that you can go to help with closing the vocabulary gap. So I will be sending it out to everyone probably tomorrow latest, alongside a link to the recorded webinar. So everyone will get a copy of that. Also, if you do have any questions during the webinar, feel free to pop them into the chat box, either to me privately or just in general, and I'll do my best to go through the questions as and when they come through. If I don't know the answers there and then, I will make a note of it and I'll get back to you as well, because there's nothing worse than being on a webinar, someone asking a question and then the speaker tries to kind of skirt around it. So if I'm not too sure on the answer, I'll make sure that I go away and research it and get back to you as soon as possible. Right, I'm just going to look at just making sure that the waiting room is disabled. Seems to be disabled on my side, but it does pop up if people are waiting. If anyone does pop up late and you know them and they've told you, please let me know and I'll be able to sort them out. But for now, I'm going to start. So my name's Charlene Shaw. I work with Your Favourite Teacher. I have done for, well, since it started really, and I'm also a qualified English teacher, so I was teaching English for 6 years before moving over and working with Your Favourite Teacher permanently this year, and I absolutely love it. But I'm going to be talking to you guys today on closing the vocabulary gap. So I know that me being an English teacher, I probably would use vocabulary a lot more in a classroom situation compared to those of you who don't have English as their kind of specialist subject, if you don't teach English regularly. However, it is something that is quite prominent in schools. It is something a lot of schools struggle with, not just an English-based thing. It is something that needs to be dealt with across the curriculum with all of the different subjects. So hopefully today I'll be able to give you the reasons why, the reasons that cause the vocabulary gap, but also giving you some classroom strategies and some reading and resources to help you as well. So a few of the things are not so much subject specific, but you can kind of use them depending on what subject you're in, you just adapt them a little bit. But also some things are like school-wide. So things such as literacy maths and stuff, which sound very primary school, but actually do really, really help at a secondary school level as well. So I'll go through those things. As I've already said, I know a few people are joining me slightly late. Sounded like I was telling you off there, but if you have joined me a little bit late and you have a question at any point during the session, just pop it in the chat box and I will do my best to answer those questions at the end of the session. And if I don't know the answer to it, I will not try and pretend that I do know the answer. I'll just let you know and I'll go away and research it for you and get back to you as soon as I can, because I think that's the better way to do it. So as we start, the first thing I'm going to show you is a form of reading comprehension. Now this is a little bit more kind of English specific, but I know in a lot of subjects, students will be up against reading a kind of large set of text in order to answer questions, whether that's in an exam situation or in English. No matter what subject you teach, at some point there will be some form of kind of reading comprehension that you'll have to go through with your classes and with your students. So this is my small extract. I say small, it looks really big now on the screen. I'm just going to leave it up there for a minute or so, just skim and scan. You don't have to read the whole thing, but just have a skim and scan and look specifically at the vocabulary that is used here and whether you'd be able to kind of tackle it yourself and understand it all. Okay, so if you're a little bit confused, that is just a little extract from Frankenstein, which is a GCSE text that students may be up against in a GCSE English exam. Students need to understand around 95% of the words to understand the text as a whole. So most students are quite good at that, and they'll be able to kind of work around it a little bit. Other students, not so much, okay? And that comes with a student's background knowledge, cultural capital gaps. It significantly affects your comprehension. That's not our complete focus today, but those sorts of things like students' background knowledge, their cultural capital gaps are things that kind of affect it. Alongside a million other things I'm probably sure you all know, and I don't want to bore you. But what I've done there from that extract is just highlighted or put into red the different words that students may look at and think, I have no idea what that means. And I'm not going to lie, when I first started teaching and was told that I had to teach a 19th century novel, I dreaded it, because even as adults, we come across words that we don't quite understand. And I think when it hits kind of teachers specifically, and a student's like, oh, what, you don't know what that means? It can be a little bit unsettling, a little bit unnerving. I definitely found that in my first kind of year or two of teaching. I'd be petrified that a student had asked me what something means and I didn't know. But that's okay. And for students, it is also okay for them not to know. So to put it into a little bit more context, we need to be thinking about how we can prepare students for this level of knowledge, and more kind of stretching and challenging, especially your top end students. So there are 27 red words, which is around 10% of the whole extract. So those words kind of go over the 95% of what you need to be able to know or understand in order to get the whole extract. So we need to look at how we can prepare students with that, and it is not easy, which is hopefully why these strategies will help you out a little bit as well. So again, some more context and why the vocabulary gap is such a big thing in schools, especially in secondary schools. So the average student starts secondary with approximately 25,000 words. It sounds like a lot, but it's really, really not. If students are word poor, they might begin with half of that, and you might see that again with your EAL students, your English as an additional language students. Their vocabularies, I found that statistic really, really shocking. Their vocabularies may be as small as 1,000 words. So I think we've probably all been there, where you've got your class and you've got the EAL student that's just started and they don't know a word of English. And it's really, really daunting, not just for you as a teacher, but for them as a student, because it must be horrible to kind of sit in a classroom and have all of the students kind of talking around them, and they don't understand. They don't understand what's going on. It can be quite overwhelming. And we need to look at how we can kind of support students like that, because a lot of them come over and start school here in England, and they're probably a lot smarter than we think they are, but because of that language barrier, they do find it difficult. Then they end up in a lower set, and then behaviour and stuff like that normally brings them down. And it's quite frustrating for the teacher, especially if we kind of know that student is a lot more able verbally compared to kind of writing things down and doing comprehension and stuff like that. So the Matthew effect. So he said, for to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have abundance, but from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. So that basically means it's kind of where the phrase the rich get richer and the poor get poorer comes into effect. So the idea of students that come up to secondary school and they have parents that kind of push them a lot more, and they've come from a good primary school and they already have like a really good vocabulary, they won't be as scared and worried to kind of take on new challenges, take on new words, grab the dictionary or the thesaurus or just really try and work things out. Whereas students that don't have that kind of starting block when they go to secondary school will be your students that are less likely to try, which becomes a vicious cycle. So if we look at the Matthew effect and apply it to reading, if a student comes to you in year 7 with poor vocabulary, they're going to struggle to read and comprehend things. That means they're going to read less. They're not going to try as much in your subject, even if you know they're really, really bright. That barrier, and we all know students like that, that barrier means that they end up kind of falling behind in all of their subjects. You might see patterns of lateness, then behaviour, and that kind of confidence academically really, really diminishes. And that's when in most schools you start to see the kind of behaviour patterns coming along. And again, I'm sure we've all had students in the past where you're just so frustrated with the way they're behaving in a school or in a classroom setting, or you know that they're very, very good and kind of switched on and they can verbally give you an amazing answer, but they can't actually read a piece of text or write things down and kind of answer the question in the same way written down that they can verbally. And that just obviously creates more poor vocabulary, and that's where students, especially at secondary school level, become quite stagnant. And when you're looking at your data and stuff like that, you'll find that students kind of plateau and then they don't get any better, and it's really, really hard to get them to achieve their target grades, and then everyone gets involved, and then progress A is a big concern, and it all kind of spirals out of control. Hopefully some of the strategies I give you a little bit later on will help to kind of curb that very early on, so that you don't end up in that position when a student gets through to year 11 and it's all about their kind of GCSEs and worrying about that. So I feel like I'm just going to read off of the slide. So by the age of 4, children in middle and upper class families hear 15 million more words. Again, that statistic really, really shocked me, than children in working class families, and 30 million more words than children in families on welfare. So, or families on benefits and universal credit and stuff like that. And it starts with parents and caregivers. It translates directly, and I think if you're sat there and you have children yourself, you probably understand that a lot more than if you don't have children. I know that I didn't see it as a big deal, but I didn't get it until I had my daughter, and she's kind of learning her words and stuff like that, and you kind of have to really, really encourage them. If they don't get that encouragement from a young age, then of course they're not going to kind of build up that confidence and tackle the hard words later on. So things that perhaps middle and upper class, I feel like I'm being classist now, but things that parents can do is go on things like Tiny Happy People. Again, all of the links are at the end of the PowerPoint, but it really, really helps with students, children, to help kind of get their head around the vocabulary that they should be experiencing. Now, I know this is personally for really, really young children. However, don't let that kind of put you off if you do have a student that you really feel might need it. That could be an EAL student. And it doesn't have to be something that the whole class can see. It could be just you set them a little bit of extra homework or different homework, but everyone in the class has kind of different homework to kind of look at. It could be used if they're perhaps out of lessons and they're in they're taken away from a different environment, classroom environment, for certain lessons. They can be using things like this to really, really help bridge that gap, so that when they're back in lesson, it's not so kind of daunting for them as well. So how do we learn vocabulary? So again, if you are a parent yourself, you probably understand this, but infancy, which is where my daughter is at the moment, I found it very interesting. Their sound library closes at 10 to 18 months. So if parents or carers aren't constantly talking to their children and kind of using that vast range of vocabulary from a young age, a very young age, it can have kind of a knock-on effect later on in life. Not massively at that stage, but if their sound library closes at 18 months roundabout, then it's very hard for students to, or children to kind of learn and comprehend new vocabulary that perhaps has a different sound to what they've already kind of got ingrained in them, if that makes sense. Moving on to early childhood and kind of being in primary school, that's when they start to learn whole phrases, they start to kind of be aware of grammar. Again, if parents and carers are kind of correcting grammar and stuff like that, it comes naturally. If they're not, then it doesn't, and we're all kind of guilty of this a lot of the time in kind of everyday speak, in conversations with friends and family. Your grammar might not be perfect, I know mine isn't, but if we're kind of making more of a conscious effort when students are younger, it really helps. So the main vocabulary, or the main kind of vocabulary growth you will see when students are slightly younger, comes from conversation. So when you translate that to a classroom setting, it needs to be something that you just embed in your lessons naturally. You kind of choose particular words and phrases that they might not understand, but if you couple with if you couple it with a kind of simpler word, I'm trying to think of an idea right now, but I can't off the top of my head, but you use kind of a bigger word and then follow it with the kind of simple term, it helps kind of ingrain it in their vocabulary, in their minds as well. And then of course, as you get to teenage years and into adulthood, that's where you really start to see how different the vocabulary development is between different students, and this is where it kind of matters in your specific subject. So if students don't have exposure to high quality, varied, archaic text to develop broad vocabulary, then it's going to be very hard for them to kind of retain that information when they go to write in an exam situation, for example. And again, you'll see that kind of top end students, students where the parents are kind of more involved and stuff like that, they'll start to grow, they'll start to kind of really shoot up, whereas others will stagnate. And that's, you know, that's anywhere from like a level 6 all the way down, or a grade 6 all the way down. It's almost like they get to a certain level and they can't kind of break through and keep or retain that extra vocabulary that they're learning. So if you're constantly repeating it in lessons, especially subject specific vocabulary, it is more likely to stick, and it is something that you're going to feel like you're constantly repeating yourself, and you probably know what I mean already, but the more you do it, the more students will begin to kind of pick up on it and use it. I remember tutoring a boy in year 11, and he remembered one of the words I used in a session really stuck in his mind, and he just constantly used it. And then when he finished his exam, he rang me and was like, oh, I used the word, I can't even remember what the word is now, but I used the word that you said. And genuinely, things like that are the difference between grades. He ended up getting his pass, his 4 or maybe a 5, but it was the second time round, because the first time round he just didn't have that vocabulary that he needed to pass his exam. But it just goes to show that it is something that you can teach and you can get them to kind of understand and access. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, but I'm not an English teacher. It's easy for me to sit here and go on about vocabulary and how it's so important. But if you're not an English teacher, it can be quite overwhelming to kind of sit there on an inset day or during a CPD session and feel like, what, so on top of everything I have to do, I've also got to make sure that they're improving their vocabulary. Surely that's an English thing. it's not, and it's easy to incorporate. So low levels of vocab set limits on literacy understanding, learning the curriculum, and can create a downward spiral of poor language, which begins to affect all aspects of life. So if, as teachers, we don't kind of set the intention in lessons across schemes of work to kind of impart that knowledge, that understanding of new vocabulary within our students, within our students, then it is going to have a knock-on effect, not just in one subject, but across all subjects. So if all teachers are working together to really help to improve that vocabulary, it will naturally make it a lot better. So words foster thoughts, better words foster better thoughts. I know you can't see that there. Didn't put the, what's it called, the animation in. But better words foster better thoughts. So the more students are constantly thinking, how can I improve this, these words, these phrases, the better their thought process is going to become. And broad and varied vocabulary results in more detailed, nuanced and precise thinking. So that's when you kind of look at your high prior attainment PP students. So we again I feel like we've all been there. I know that I kind of always used to think PP students meant that they perhaps weren't as far along as some other students in the class. However, that's not the case. So things like targeting your pupil premium students even more not only gives the difference between a kind of level 4, a level 5, or a 5 and a 6, but it also really helps your top end students to really foster that understanding and get those thought processes working so that they can achieve those higher grades, because without that more detailed and more broad and varied vocabulary, they're not going to achieve the grades that perhaps they deserve. So obviously it's start again. Obviously, vocabulary is set out typically into tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3. Tier 1 we use every day, we use it in conversations. It's, you know, it's easy. Students get it, teachers get it, we get it. Tier 2 is when we start to look at that academic vocabulary. So it might be kind of using the Bloom's taxonomy question stems and stuff like that. That is using tier 2 vocabulary. You might hear it in English, but you'll also hear it in science or in history and stuff like that. So tier 2 vocabulary is just that little bit of a step up, but you hear it across subjects. You don't just hear it in certain subjects. But when you get to tier 3, that is subject specific. Okay, so that is what you need to be including in your everyday lessons, in starter activities, in quick like traffic light situations and stuff like that, where you're kind of assessing their understanding of certain words, certain phrases that you might find specifically in science, for example, that you might not see in maths, although there's lots of maths in science. So maybe I should have said science in English. So moving on to the how and giving you some actual examples and things that you can be doing. So explicit vocabulary teaching in English and in all other subjects. I know it starts with English and with English teachers. However, if it's not then kind of built on within other subjects, then students will only get so far. Studies have found that if you hear, see, write and say new words repeatedly, even if students get bored of doing the same thing, it really helps to improve vocabulary. Learning words in the context of their use, and the importance of conversations and wider reading in the classroom and at home. So where I said earlier about kind of using kind of specific words, but then using a simpler word straight after so they understand what it means. And you're constantly doing that because you're constantly kind of cementing sorry, I've got a really tickly cough. You're really cementing that kind of understanding of certain words, and then students again are more likely to understand it. So then it kind of boils down to which words are each subject going to use. And that vocab development, in that sense, it needs to be planned and synced with your curriculum development. So it's not just something that you kind of think, oh, I've not done any vocabulary work this lesson, I'll just do it as a quick spelling test at the end. It needs to be planned, it needs to be put into your curriculum. So if you are in a position where you're creating curriculum maps, you're creating schemes of work, you need to make sure that there are activities embedded throughout that really focus on vocabulary. I always say to choose harder than you think. I think the default for teachers is to always try and explain things in the easiest way possible. Obviously, you need to do that for students to be able to access tasks and understand the content of the lesson, but you need to make sure that you're also getting in there the harder vocabulary, even if it is coupled with the simpler term. There are loads of lists available, so you can look at SATS words, Spelling City lists, there's GCSE, top spellings, there's an academic word list at sixth form, there's lots of different things, and again I've got some resources for you at the end. Making lists from GCSE texts, daily, weekly or termly lists in English, but you can also do that in other subjects. So it might be something that's done once a week in science, as well as something that's done in English, for example. And the main thing is just keep repeating it, keep exposing students to that kind of tier 2, tier 3 vocabulary. The more they see it around your classroom, in displays around the halls, word of the week, some schools do, where it's across like the whole school. All of those things will really, really help to kind of embed those higher level vocabulary words into like students' consciousness almost. And you can, from the exam boards, get subject specific vocabulary. This is obviously a science example, but you can get it for all of the subjects, and it will give you kind of specific wording that you need or students need to understand in exams. If not, I'm pretty sure every subject does it, every exam board does it, but if not, it's just a case of kind of flicking through an exam paper. Okay, what words within this question would students kind of stumble upon? Get students to do it themselves. Give students an exam paper and get them to go through and highlight all the words just within the question that they don't understand, and then get them to kind of look it up, talk about it, the conversation behind it, students talking to each other and talking with the teacher or with the classroom assistant. That really, really helps to kind of cement that understanding of what words mean. And it means that when they get to an exam situation, they open that paper and they're less likely to freak out and skip a question, because hopefully they would have already been exposed to it prior to the exam. Things like switching, I think I've said this a million times, switching things out. So my example, the tone of the music is whimsical and rapid. How would the meaning change if I switched a word? So I've changed it to cheerful, I've changed it to frenzied. Doing little things like that, you can just have a sentence from science, from history, from geography, from maths, and you kind of underline one word, and students need to kind of swap it out for different words so that they start to build up their vocabulary. They can be using a thesaurus. Thesauruses and dictionaries should be in every classroom, no matter what the subject. Hopefully they are in your school. As I say, it isn't just an English problem. It needs to be across the curriculum. But this is a really quick way, a really good starter activity. It could be something that students are doing whilst you're taking the register. If it's ingrained into your everyday routines, once a week or twice a week they come in and they have to do an activity like this, not only does it help with your own classroom management because they know they've got set tasks that they need to be doing, but it just helps with that vocabulary. You can, you know, if you've got 6 weeks in a term and you do 3, oh God, I'm going to really do my maths badly. Oh, that was a terrible sentence. But you can work out basically how many sentences you would need across a half term to switch out for students, so that they can really start to think about that vocabulary. And you can have clues all around the classroom. It's all about the visual, I would say, for students, the visual and just hearing it constantly. Cleverly avoided having to do any maths there, says the English teacher. Pre-scan for new vocabulary. So again, like I said, with an exam paper or just with an extract from a text for English or from a textbook in any other subject, and students highlight and kind of create lists of new words before reading for meaning. So they kind of skim and scan through, select all the words that they don't understand. Okay, what might this word mean? And you have that conversation. You have the use of your dictionaries and your thesauruses, so that rather than it being something that's kind of added on towards the end, oh miss, I don't understand this word, actually you're facing it, you're confronting it head on, and you're letting students know that it's okay if they don't know it. It's okay if they don't understand a specific word, because they know that at some point in the lesson, at some point during that activity, they're going to have the time to kind of go through it. And I know that there's the pressure of getting through a scheme of work and getting students exam ready. But if they don't understand the vocabulary, they're not going to be exam ready. So it needs to be something that you spend a little bit of time on within lessons to kind of really focus on. So when reading the challenging words, repeat the synonym or the short definition as you read. Again, I think I've said that a million times. Oh, there's a nice example that I couldn't think of earlier. So such was the reward for my benevolence, kindness. So if you're saying benevolence, kindness, and you constantly do things like that to give them the simpler word straight after the difficult word, just really helps them to understand and consolidate that is what that means. And then when they go into an exam situation, oh, I'll use benevolence instead of kindness. Win-win. Using the synonym and a connotation to help them with moving from known to unknown vocabulary. So you've got the idea of the verb strut. What does it actually mean? What's a synonym of strut? They're just walking, but walking's boring, so they want to use a different verb, a better verb. And the connotation, overconfident. So they're constantly reading for meaning and understanding what specific words mean. They can work it out within a sentence as well. So they might look at a word that they don't understand, look at it within the context of the sentence and work out that actually strut means walk, for example. And if you're strutting, it sounds quite confident or overconfident. Again, little activities that you can just kind of include throughout the lesson and give students, 5 minutes to have a look for some unknown vocabulary. What's a synonym? What's the connotation? Really, really quick, easy things. You've got the SEEC model. So this is kind of moving past using it as a quick 5-minute activity and kind of extending it, expanding it. So looking at it, selecting words, explaining what they mean, exploring it, so breaking the word down, and then consolidating students' understanding of it by testing, quizzing them, using the word in their own speech and writing. So that would kind of be an expansion of kind of doing that 5-minute activity where they look for words they don't understand. You might want to spend 10-15 minutes instead with your class getting them to really kind of break it down. Don't worry, all of this is getting sent out tomorrow latest. You've got the Freya model where you put the vocab that you're wanting to explore in the middle. And then you've got the kind of definition and the characteristics and where the word might originate from, just to help kind of break down the word even further. And this works really, really well, especially if you're looking at your tier 2 and your tier 3 words, your subject specific words. This works really well to create like some flashcards and stuff like that, so students are able to go back to it and use it as a form of revision. So maybe it's not something you use once a week in your lessons, but it could be like the go-to, that when you get to the end of a unit and they're creating revision materials or they're preparing for an assessment, that you use the Freya model to help them break down that vocabulary and understand it a little bit more, with the intention of when you go to mark their work, you'll see these higher level vocabulary words within their writing. Morphology, so looking at meaning maps, breaking down the word even more. So I've used photosynthesis from science, and you kind of look at breaking down the word. So what other meanings can we get from photosynthesis? So it's photograph, photosensitive, synth, thesis, synthesis. You can really get students to break it down. I would say this works really, really well for your kind of higher level students, getting them to kind of break it down. Even your kind of middle to low ability, it kind of gets them understanding it, or understanding a word in a little bit more depth. But specifically for the high level students, it really, really helps them to kind of get that real in-depth understanding of the word and what it means and how they can apply it to different contexts, different situations. So obviously we know that not all similar words are relevant, so you need to make that very, very clear from the kind of teaching perspective. So if you give them the word, you might have up on the board, don't focus on these words, so they've got like banned words that they can't kind of use within their meaning map. Okay, just to kind of help support perhaps the lower ability students as well. Higher ability, obviously you would trust and hope that they know not to put something down that might not be relevant. But again, to scaffold it for your lower ability students, it could be something where you've got a list of banned words, for example, and you might have that covered at first to kind of really help and challenge the students, and then uncover it towards the end, and they've got to go back and check, because the more they're repeating the process, the more they're checking, the more they're reading it, the more likely the vocabulary is to go in. This is something I've actually taken from one of the schools I used to work in. So it's a literacy mat. I know I think I said it at the start, it sounds quite primary school, but I really do think it helps in secondary school as well. So this one is just an English example, but you can change it depending on your subject and your school's kind of literacy policies. So for English, for example, you've got the definitions of the different language features, you've got sentences, and you've got the kind of structure of an analytical paragraph. If you're in science, you might not have that. You might have a different way of writing responses to exam questions and stuff like that. So that might change. Your key terms will obviously change. It will be mitosis and photosynthesis, and those are the only ones I can remember science-wise. Again, it will change for geography, it'll change for history, and it'll be those keywords that they need to know. This is where the tier 3 vocabulary is going to come in. You might have your school's literacy policy on there as well. The idea being that is in every classroom across the school, obviously subject specific. So if you're in technology, for example, you'd have your literacy mats specific to there, and that would be different to obviously English, to geography, to science, to maths. But students have it there and they know that it's there, they know it's in every classroom, and they can use it and refer to it as much as possible. Again, it's all about that kind of overexposure. The more they see it around, the more they see it in your classrooms, on the walls, on the mat, at the front of their books, wherever you want to put it, the more it's there, the more they're likely to kind of pick up on it and use the correct word as well. So hopefully I've gone through everything. So the vocabulary gap, the effects and causes, how we learn vocabulary specifically, I think that is quite key. The more you understand it from a very basic level, from like toddler or baby level, the easier it becomes to understand where students kind of might fall off, and what gaps in their knowledge come from where when they get to you guys at secondary school. How vocabulary works within the curriculum, and a few classroom strategies as well to help you out. So, as I said, I've got some recommended reading and a few resources for you as well. I've put them all here. I did say obviously at the start that I will send them out to everyone. So I will make sure I send it out along with a link to this webinar in case you want to look back at anything, or watch me fail miserably at maths, or get myself out of failing miserably at maths. But yeah, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat now. And hopefully that has been really, really helpful. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to get in contact with the YFT team or me specifically. You've just got to email charlene@yourfavouriteteacher.com, and I'll be able to get back to you with any questions you might have if you don't send them through now. Yes, you will be able to have a copy of the PowerPoint, so I will send that out to everyone that attended the webinar. I will send it out either today. I'd quite like to send it out alongside the link to the webinar, but if you want it desperately today, I will send it straight after the webinar. If you can wait until tomorrow, I'll definitely be sending it out then. But yes, everyone will have a copy of the PowerPoint and the video that I'm on right now. Hope that's okay. If you have any questions, please pop them in now. I'm just going to pop my email. My email in there as well, just in case anyone has any questions they want to ask me personally. Anyway, but yeah, that's it. Hope you enjoyed. If there are no questions, feel free to leave the Zoom meeting. I'll hang around for a little bit longer, but that is it. That's the end. Thanks, guys.